It's now time for On the Line with Cheryl Wilkerson. The conversation will range from local dialogue to international. This show is meant to enlighten, inform, and to inspire. On the Line with Cheryl Wilkerson begins now.
That Lord knows I need it, because Cheryl, we have with us Pastor Mark Whitaker, Dr. Whitaker, who is also a city council person with the city of Portsmouth. He has the distinction of being a full scholar athlete in the past at Virginia Tech. He played the basketball. He's a tall guy, but I think I might have been able to put some defense on him.
There you go.
I know I could.
There you go.
I'm not going to hold it against him that he chose Virginia Tech when we needed him at Hampton, at Norfolk State University. Ooh.
Listen to you.
I made a mistake there.
A big mistake.
But he's a Manor graduate from Party Down, P-Town, Portsmouth, and he's a servant to the people in Portsmouth. As I said, passed in the school board, his church, and also now as a city councilman. Pastor Whitaker, Dr. Whitaker, thank you for coming and welcome.
Welcome to the Hot Morning Show.
Glad to be with you.
Yeah, so I think it's no secret that a lot is going on in Portsmouth. There's been tumult. We had, police chiefs have come and gone, and the city managers have come and gone. And, not long ago we had a mayor that was arrested for some kind of violation, a ticket or something. And a lot is going on. There's a lot of power struggle. Let me ask this first. What is the direction that we see for Portsmouth? If you could say, I want to iron this out and I want Portsmouth to go this way, and these are the 1, 2, 3 things that I think we need to improve in Portsmouth, and this is my vision, what would they be?
First of all, let me just say that one of the reasons that it is vital that we have a station such as this at a HBCU is that it needs to put forth a message that is different from the mainstream media. Mm-hmm. The issues that have been going on in Portsmouth are issues that we're seeing nationwide. Mm-hmm. I think the question, particularly at a research institution like Norfolk State University, historically black, that it should be asking the question, why is Portsmouth being portrayed in that way by the mainstream media? We've been portrayed as being dysfunctional, disorganized, and I think that needs to be really challenged and questioned. Dr. King spoke about that, and where do we go from here as far as how the black media should be presenting our community and questioning how. I think if we perpetuate those images of our community that is being perpetuated by mainstream, then we're doing a disservice. And so I would think that this station should put forth this message that Portsmouth is moving in a direction of positiveness, given the cultural connotation out of which we come, the history of slavery there, the segregation that existed. And so that context cannot be ignored when you look at what's happening in our city today, and it should be kept within that context as we talk about progression. And so it's not just 1, 2, 3 things, but it's a fact that you have, once again, a majority black city council. You have very progressive thinking members, and you still have within our community a very conservative voice that is not only influencing the conservative white community, but also, sadly, influencing some of our black leadership.
Okay, that's interesting. And, and we had the mayor just a week ago, a little bit more than a week ago. Yeah. And I asked this question because, as you mentioned a lot of these things, particularly where you say the size of the city council as it is concerned with the number of African Americans or minorities who are on city council. We have this electorate that shows up, they vote, and they put Dr. Whitaker on council. And then this smaller subset of the electorate decides, we don't want Dr. Whitaker. Is the will of the people being undermined when that happens?
Well, I think what the mayor has done truly, again, is a disservice to the community. Again, context. You got to remember that Mayor Glover was initially ran for office a few years ago when Mayor Kenneth Wright was the mayor and was a very successful mayor, sharp, independent thinker. And you will remember that out of nowhere, the white community, the business structure, presented Shannon Glover to split the black vote. And you remember it ushered in Mayor John Rowe.
Right.
That ushered in a very 4-member conservative white city council, which we found that State Senator Louise Lucas actually endorsed John Rowe during that campaign. And we had a conservative white majority city council that voted in underfunding education. They kicked minority contracting down the street. And so when Mayor Glover is presented, you got to remember the context out of which he comes. And that's nothing personal. That's just a decision that he decided to allow himself to be used by the white community in that way. And so when he speaks of unity and disunity, my question is always, how do you measure that? Because we are elected as individuals. We're not elected as a ticket. And so I always represent interests and values. And the citizens of Portsmouth since 2002 have elected me into office as either on the school board or the city council. And those interests have been unashamedly trying to make sure that our community is funded properly when it comes to education. I've lifted up the minority contracting issue in our community and a sense of fairness and equity that should be present, which was part of my decision. That was part of my decision basis in what I did in voting to fire the city manager.
If you were not on council or on the school board and you were sitting back, Dr. Whitaker, what would you say about what is unfolding within the city? What would you say? You're a taxpayer and you're paying your hard-earned money.
You mean, what would I say as far as what?
The disruption amongst city council itself.
Well, see, that's what I'm saying again. There's not a disruption on city council. That's just the image that the media is portraying, and what I'm hoping that our community will see that once again is being misinformed. For the most part, we vote 7-0. The only issue that has been of contention is the city manager. We got a report from our advisors. The city is stable financially. Our credit rating is AA. There's no dysfunction there. You just have, on any organization where there's a majority vote, you have a majority that voted one way. That's not dysfunctional. That's operational. And that's what we did. And for it to be portrayed any other way, corruption, all of this misinformation, I think it's very important that the public know that the superintendent of Portsmouth Public Schools put out a press release from the Portsmouth Public Schools criticizing the mayor, saying that the information that he put out was false and misleading. I've never seen that happen in a school district in this region, criticizing a mayor like that. And so I think that
So the council, did they push back on that report?
The school, no, that was from the school board. That was the school board, because the mayor attempted to, and is still in the process from what I understand, tried to take out some criminal charges because I was lifting up minority contracting, which I've been fighting for since I was on the school board. And what transpired was definitely within our policy, but for some reason he felt it necessary to say that there was some criminal involvement, which is not the case. And the superintendent of schools put out a press release saying that what he presented was false and misleading. And so I think that our community cannot get caught up on emotionalism, which is what is happening, and we need to make sure that we are dealing with facts.
So there's a lot to unpack here, and I understand that some of these things are ongoing. For instance, the city of Portsmouth has chosen to let go the previous, most recent city manager, and you mentioned that a minute ago. And so some of those things are sensitive and can be spoken about in just certain ways. I know there's some legalities or potential for legalities where someone's employment is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
The word on the street, because I'm not bright enough to know everything, and I don't go to every city council meeting and follow everything. But you just told me that the credit rating is AA. Financially, the city is, theoretically speaking, that if someone were to look at the books, that money is being spent and invested in the ways that should be. Somebody may disagree about whether or not there should be a stop sign on this street or on that street, or whether we should do this or do that, but there's no corruption or mismanagement. And this city manager that just left did 11 months. And what has been said on the street, and I don't know how true this is that because crime had not went down by a certain factor, that it was time for this city manager to go. But is there any truth in that? Let's start there. Or are there other factors that are way outside of that?
I can tell you personally, because you must remember now that the former city manager was brought in on a 4-3 vote. I voted amongst the 4 to hire her. So therefore, it is my vote that becomes the pivotal vote that causes her to be fired.
Okay.
I put my rationale in writing, and I submitted it on the public record. When you read it, there's no mention of crime.
Okay.
Because just as when they tried to say Kenny Wright was responsible for crime in the city of Portsmouth, which I never saw them hold any mayor in this region to, I don't feel that it was on the shoulders of Miss Angel Jones to address and correct and be responsible for crime, because we know that crime runs deeper than a city manager's action. Okay. That crime is systemic. Sure. It is based on poverty, social conditions, which were beyond her control. So it had nothing to do with the crime issue in my regards. And as I said, it was my vote that becomes the pivotal vote. Mine dealt with issues that are in my statement, which mainly pertain to equity. And I feel that if we are seriously talking about changing the topography of the city, where you get minority contracting involved, where you have equity as far as how developers are getting resources, that we can't have that being continued. And that's something I don't play with, I don't tolerate. And so I made my decision. How can you have 30 acres of land that is valued at $3.5 million sold to a developer for $157,000? That's unexcusable. You don't see those transactions happening with black developers. Okay, council should have been made aware of that. Okay, and so when I see minority contracting is not being addressed as it should, and we have our folks, see, this is what disturbs me, is that every time I look at this minority contracting issue, it's black folks who are there who can make a difference, but we become gatekeepers and we perpetuate it. And then all we want to do is sit back and discuss it when we could have made a difference. And so my decision had nothing to do with crime. My wife is a sociologist, okay, PhD in sociology. We talk about it all the time. I know some of the root causes, and it has nothing to do with the city manager. It has everything to do with policies that councils pass, policies and rules that we see coming out of legislative bodies that can make a difference.
That helps clarify a great deal for, I think, a lot of people.
People have never heard that.
People have never heard that.
See, the question should be, why did they jump to judgment like they did? Considering my record in Portsmouth, I've always stood firm on representing our community on socioeconomic issues. And for those ministers that are involved in this recall with some of the most conservative white groups in our city who have never spoken on any black issues in our city. And for them to be following their leadership to lead a recall against me, and I have stood in the gap and I have spoken up. I have taken felony charges against me, attacking me because of my stand, which, as you all know, I received an absolute pardon. I'm in the process of some legal actions. I'm saying for them to have not respected my position in the past, and they know how I've stood. I've always spoken out against disparity. And for them to disparage my name and attach it to corruption, and for Lisa Lucas Burke to make statements about pay for play and all without any type of evidence, I think it has been a disservice to our community. And so that's why I feel if our community is going to listen to voices like that, then so be it. But I know that it will not be based on truth, that is based on misinformation and lies. My record, ever since I was a student at Virginia Tech, speaking out against the racism as the president of the Black Student Alliance there. When I went to Ohio State as a law student, my law classmates voted me president of the Black Law Student Association for 2 years. This is not something that I just walked into. And I think you need to check out the activism of those who are trying to be activists. Mm-hmm. Check out their backgrounds and see, are they just Johnny come lately to the scene, or have they actually been sacrificed? Have they actually put anything on the table, or are they just following the political power structure in Portsmouth, the good old boy system that has always ruled? And when people like Kenny Wright and myself speak out, you saw what they did to Kenny. Sheriff chases him through the town. Right. You saw no black preachers lining up calling for a recall of Bill Watson. When they fired Andre Thomas as the city auditor, you saw no black preachers line up and try to get those council members recalled. When they marched Tanya Chapman out of this city, when she raised systemic racism issues, you saw no black preachers stand up and call for that majority white council to be recalled. You did not see it happen.
You know, you bring up so many excellent points. And let me talk about one thing important that we do have evidence and we do have proof of, is you stood up and you said these monuments have to come down.
Oh, yeah.
Which, you know, in the moment, and I think actually your push for the monuments to come down preceded the culture, preceded, you were ahead of the curve on the national conversation. You were ahead on that. I think there are pockets around the country, particularly in the state of Virginia, where a lot of these monuments exist, where there were conversations in quiet here and there. But you stepped out very early and pushed for this. You know, it's kind of a foregone conclusion why. But as you were going through that process, what did you see happening to you? What did you see happening to the community? And what do you think has happened, or what has been the benefit, or maybe the opposite for the community since then?
Yeah, well, I've always not tried to be a person of consensus. I try to be a person of conscience. Ever since I was a little boy, and I used to walk downtown with my mother. She would take us shopping, and we would walk by that monument, and she explained to us what it meant. And then my father, as a social justice preacher, and what he preached from the pulpit about equity, it was not an issue of whether the community was in agreement. It was wrong for that monument to be there. Right. And when it's wrong, you don't look for a consensus. You just stand on what's right. I know I took some ridicule for that from both the black and the white.
Some slings and some arrows.
From both the black and white community. But once again, you have to stand on what your values are. And I've always been a person of deep faith, and so I know that what I was representing there was true. It needed to go. I did not have to get a majority opinion on it. And so when Kenneth Wright, I called him up and told him, come on, this TV station wants to interview me. I want you to be there also. And we stood there at that monument. And when that monument came down, I was there that night. When some of Norfolk State band members came there, it was like a party. And I was glad to see it come down. It was well over time, and I think that the community needed to see that happen as well for our children.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think just a little bit before that was going on, I was living on High Street in the 600 block, and I did a lot of business in that community. My office was outside of Roger Brown's in front where the tables are, which means I took all my clients
Roger Brown.
to lunch. Little cocktail. Oh, let's have a conversation. But I used to walk past the monuments on a regular basis, and I couldn't understand how these things continued to stand. And so, I'll say this. Your stance on that was, courageous and brave and refreshing, and it was so needed, and I applaud you for that so much. Thank you.
Yeah,
I have friends very politically connected in Richmond, and they were early on it as well, and they caught flack, and they're on the radio daily. And it was interesting over the time how the people that gave them flack now will call in and say, you know what, I changed my mind. I understand now. You were right.
Right. And see, as a student athlete at Virginia Tech, I spoke out. I was the only basketball player that had ever graduated over a 7-year period. When I went there in 83 and I graduated in 87, the school went under an NCAA investigation, and they found out I was the only one to have ever graduated from Virginia Tech in a 7-year period.
As an athlete.
As a basketball player. And then as president of the Black Student Alliance, I spoke out against how black student organizations were not being funded as white student organizations. I got a lot of flack from that from both black students and white students. I learned from that when you stand on the right thing, that things will be taken care of one way or the other, that justice always rise. When I ended up graduating from Virginia Tech, the Black Student Alliance ended up having the highest funding in the history of the organization. Okay, I was threatened that I would not receive a job because I was graduating. The first job offer that I got after I graduated from law school, Ohio State, was to come back to Virginia Tech and teach business law. And so the threats, I found out that the Lord can make your enemies your footstool.
Your footstools. That's exactly
so
right.
that has been something I learned at a very early age. So when I stand on what is right and true, I know that justice will ultimately win in the end.
May I ask about the storage facility?
The storage facility?
Yeah, you all voted against the storage facility recently.
Oh, well,
I had people asking why. So if you could clear that up while they're listening, that would be helpful.
Yeah, my concern is with that site. That is one of thousands of sites around the country, Superfund sites that are in usually marginalized communities. When I read the report and they say it's low risk, okay, so it doesn't say no risk, it says low risk. So now that low risk means something to the extent that it might not happen to a large percentage of a population, that there's a low risk of occurrence. I'm not willing to take that chance on a family, a child, that low risk could possibly end up impacting. So that's where I stand on that. I know there are people who put revenue and they put economics above people. I try not to do that. I'd rather err on the right side, because the site wouldn't have been like that from the beginning if people were more concerned about humanity rather than economics. And when they put that poor black neighborhood on property that they knew was contaminated, don't now come talking to me about the potential for revenue when those children that lived in that lead-infested area have been damaged for life. And it was sad to see that there was a white female that came and spoke, and other blacks were speaking at council saying that, I don't have cancer, I haven't been affected. Well, just because you don't have it, that don't mean that there weren't people that weren't. And so, Dr. King I think he made this statement that sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity are two of the most dangerous things in the world. And I think, I try not to approach those things out of that context.
So this is a question I continue to. I'm not from Virginia originally, and I'm always curious, and I'm particularly curious in the city of Portsmouth. Is there greater protection for the elected officials to serve their people and not, for instance, be recalled or have somebody, if we go to a ward system where, you actually represent this neighborhood, and therefore if a recall occurs, it would have to be from not the neighborhood, but this particular ward or district or what have you. It could not just be that easily. The will of the greater, populace cannot just be overturned so easily. And do we not get greater representation for the individuals who live in a ward if they have somebody who they say, oh, I know where he is. He's around the corner. He lives in this neighborhood. He goes to the barber in this community. He goes to the grocery store here. I saw him the other day. He had a flat tire, but backing out of his driveway. Or, is there a greater opportunity for our officials to be disconnected from the individual communities like Prentice Park if we're not actually in that community?
Well, two issues I see there in regards to what you raised as far as the recall and representation. First of all, as far as recall and protecting that, Portsmouth Charter has very general language. You just get a certain number of votes and people to sign a petition. It gets, certified, and then there's an election. What I proposed, and we actually presented to the General Assembly, was that Portsmouth put in place criteria for recall, just as the state, and it was supposed to model the language in the state. It had successfully gotten through the General Assembly until Tim Anderson, who is a very conservative representative out of Virginia Beach, pulled a tactic that put our charter amendment back into committee on the last day, so therefore it failed. But that's the way I think you strengthen it. You put in criteria that protects them for recall. The second issue you raised that I think we have to think more politically astute about is, remember, I think ward systems were put in place because communities were not being represented in the majority, and to somehow put in place measures that we have representation by underrepresented communities. You had these ward systems so that black folks could have representation. That's not the case in Portsmouth. I understand what you're saying, but I think before we get into that conversation, we got to recognize, hey, we've gotten political power. We've gotten majority representation through what we have now. What we have to make sure is that we're putting people in place that represent our interests, because even with a ward system, that does not necessarily guarantee that just because a person lives in that community that they have that community's interests at heart, because I can just move to a community just to get elected on the ward. So you just have to have residency.
Yeah,
Right.
It doesn't mean you,
Yeah.
right. It doesn't mean you really have a true interest. And so I think for where we are now in Portsmouth, that we have seen majority black city councils elected. I'm not sure if we want to disturb that power base at this point and go to a ward system where we would possibly lose some of that authority. And also, we could be giving up some unnecessary power.
Interesting.
May I ask a question?
Please.
I know I'm off this front poke, but anyway. Okay, explain this one to me, Dr. Whitaker. Why did the current city manager get the deal she got if she's fired within a year? Why so much money? So much money, I don't know. But why that amount of money? Could you explain that to us?
Sure.
The thought behind that?
Yeah, because if persons have been conscious, they have heard the mayor, they have heard our council member Lisa Lucas Burke, heard Moody. They've made comments to the extent that the next election she may not be here, okay? She's already been drummed out of town one time before. Okay? If you do it this time, you're going to pay her. Now, that's as simple as I can make it. Whether I'm there or not, you see, and we need to stop letting our folks being treated any kind of way and disrespected. And she was disrespected. This is restorative justice with her coming back. The community was highly upset, but they didn't speak out like they should have.
They were highly upset when
Chief Chapman was fired. They were upset, but you didn't see the reaction like you're seeing now to those 4 white council members who we know gave the wink to city manager Dr. Patton for it to happen, because it wouldn't have happened like that without council being given some type of approval of that. So what I'm saying is that if you do it again, if you want to play that type of politics, you're not going to railroad her this time, that you're going to pay, because she suffered significantly. She tried to get positions in other cities, and because of what happened in Portsmouth, it was denied. And so that's the basis of it. I stand firm on it. And remember, this is something that may happen.
Right.
It has not happened.
Correct.
But look at how the community responded to what did happen. That developer did get a $3 million discount
for that land.
I don't see the community and outrage over that.
And where's that land?
That is behind Tidewater Community College, 309 McLean Street. That did happen, okay? The Tanya Chapman severance pay has not happened. It's something that could happen. You see what I'm saying?
And when you're saying she will get paid, you don't think that's excessive. You think that's a normal amount.
Oh, no,
for
I don't think it's
restorative.
excessive. I don't think it's excessive because it happens only if it occurs within the first year.
Gotcha.
Okay? Mm-hmm. And so if they want to play politics like that, can't keep playing politics with persons' lives. They did that to her as the chief. They're not going to do it this time. I stand firmly behind that. And anyone that disagrees, that's part of life. You can disagree, but there is nothing corrupt. There's nothing illegal. We didn't violate any charter, any state code. We were advised from our attorney that was okay. So I'm fine.
So so we're discussing Tanya Chapman, and you mentioned that she had difficulties finding jobs in other cities. She was, in fact, up for a job in a city in Maryland,
right.
And they came back, and in fact, she was chosen, and then they rescinded their offer.
Right.
If I understand,
that's right.
If you're just joining us, we're here with Dr. Mark Whitaker, Pastor Whitaker from City of Portsmouth, who is a council person in Portsmouth and a should have been Norfolk State University basketball scholar, but it's okay. We don't hold it against him. Pastor, you also hold a law degree. You've done a lot of impressive things. You've been a professor at Hampton University for how many years? 20 years. We won't hold that against him. It's okay. My mother graduated from Hampton Institute, and I don't hold that against her. It's really her fried chicken is questionable, but that's a whole other thing. Pastor Whitaker, let me also, and Cheryl and I, we talked about this offline, and I hope this is, we wanted to also acknowledge that, unfortunately here recently, a week ago, you lost your father. Yeah. And so extend our condolences to you on that. My next question, I don't want to talk about politics, and we can certainly get back to it if Cheryl, you feel necessary. I want to talk about manhood. You stand here as a man. You've been through things. You stood up on the right side of this, or sometimes you probably stood up on the wrong side of that and didn't know, or whatever. You have a father like yours who led his family, and now you have a family of 4 or 4 children. Mm-hmm. How do you pass on to your son? You have one, Nathaniel, and James. the kind of courage it takes to stand up and say these monuments must go, although the people, the white power structure, the state of Virginia, the United States is against what you're saying. How do you pass that on? And do you see how awesome of a challenge it is for, at some point, your son was 4 or 7 or 12, and now they're graduating from college, and et cetera. Mm-hmm. Do you see how awesome of a challenge it is to say to some small black boy who's different, who's not cared for by the world, that you have to go out here and fight these fights too? Yeah.
I think that my responsibility when my wife birthed our first son, James, then our daughter, Naomi, and Nate, Nathaniel, and Rachel, my responsibility of being a father was to be there and instill in them a strong sense of what my father instilled in his did too, a sense of who I am and whose I am, who I am from a historical, cultural. My father was very proud of the fact that his parents were sharecroppers out of Scotland Neck. He didn't try to dismiss that as
Correct.
less, but that was something very powerful, that sharecropper can raise 7 children, okay, buy a house, okay, out of Scotland Neck, North Carolina. That instilled a sense of what Dr. Howard Thurman, the noted theologian for Dr. King, this sense of somebodyness, you see. And I think when you instill that in your children's culture, not being ashamed of who we are, speaking truth about our history, doesn't begin in slavery. It begins in Kemet in Africa, Nubia. You instill those things in them, and a faith that brings us and keeps us. And then as far as whose I am, that strong sense of knowing I'm a child of God. And that's the challenge that I saw, that I wanted to make sure that my sons did not become statistics. And I know I was tough. And I was tough because they were going to face a tough world.
That's right.
And I didn't want them to experience that for the first time outside of the home. I wanted them to experience it in the home.
So it started at their birth, really.
Oh, yeah. Instilling critical thinking, challenging them to, to read, do your homework, a discipline. My son ended up getting a basketball scholarship to North Carolina A&T, my oldest son.
Here we go again. Not coming in Norfolk State. Here we go again.
He was not the most talented basketball player, just like I wasn't.
Right, okay.
But a sense of discipline and working, that's what helped bring him through. It's that same work ethic now that he now uses as having finished his first year of law school at North Carolina Central. And my youngest son, Nate, who is at Morehouse on a track scholarship. Okay? That same.
But they're HBCUs, man. They're HBCUs.
I give him that much.
Norfolk State didn't offer the money.
Call me. I'm going to talk to somebody.
But the same thing with him, discipline. And I try to instill that's what makes the difference. And I used to tell my students at Hampton that it's the discipline that's going to get you.
It is.
Okay, showing up to class, taking notes, just the little things. And I tell you, and I told my son, I'll take someone that's disciplined and hard worker any day over just someone who's just is a student, but they're not disciplined. And I've had students in the past I didn't write recommendations for that were excellent, but I knew they were not disciplined. I wrote a recommendation for a young lady, Dimples Irby. When I taught at Virginia Tech, the white professors wouldn't write her a recommendation for her master's, and because her grades weren't there. But I knew she had the discipline to do it, and I wrote her a recommendation, contacted my contact at Penn State University MBA program. They gave Dimples a full ride to Penn State. Dimples went there, ended up being the assistant to the minority affairs director at the school, because I knew she could do it, because she showed up in class, sat on the front, was not intimidated by my questioning, and she did the work. And so I tell people, it's really the discipline that will get you through. And so that's what I've tried to instill. And I'll tell you, and my daughter Naomi ended up getting a track scholarship to East Carolina. And so just putting in that discipline.
All this great talent.
And she's
past Norfolk State.
Y'all didn't want to pay the toll.
That's what it was. So our youngest daughter is at IC Norcom. We sent her to Norcom, although we were zoned for Churchland. We sent her to Norcom because of historic family environment. Didn't buy into the myth of it being a dangerous environment. Matter of fact, we sent our children to Lakeview Elementary School, which was unaccredited at the time. Okay. The school they could have gone to was accredited, but I knew that accreditation did not measure the desire of teachers in those buildings to educate children. And so, we've tried to instill a sense of somebodyness to them.
All right. We've taken a good deal of time. I do want to make sure, Cheryl,
I'm good.
You're
yes.
clear. Let me ask, just super simple. What's on the horizon for Portsmouth? What is the next? Where are the improvements being made? Where are the things that are going to get greater? Where are the things that need more attention? What are those things?
I think one of the biggest projects is the development of the waterfront. That represents generational wealth.
Yes.
When you see the multi-million dollars that's going to be tied up in that project, you will understand why the attacks come against persons like myself and Kenneth Wright. Because, see, we're not caught up in just how it looks and how appealing and how nice. See, I want to know, of that $1 million, how is it going to be dispersed amongst minority contractors? See, that's Maynard Jackson. See,
are you pleased with how it's being dispersed?
Oh
with
no,
the casinos?
See, the casino deal was done with no minority contracting that was in place for the contractor to follow. No penalties. And see, we get caught up in just the building going up and this is somewhere we can go, where they walk away with the dollars, the real dollars. You see, my issue has always been, as the contractors, who is the contractor? Okay, who's the architect? Okay, Maynard Jackson in Atlanta, one of the things that he did was make sure that there were Marion Barry contracts. And that's what our people, they got to stop getting caught up in all of this superficial stuff and be willing to address the real issues. I learned that from my father. When we were building sanctuary, that sanctuary is going to be funded by the American Baptist Association and what is now Bank of America. This was back in the 80s. When American Baptists came to my father, they said, you got to use this contractor, this architect, these subs. And my father said, we already have our contractor. It's the A&A group, a black contracting group. We already have our architect. It's the Lavish group out of Norfolk. They said, well, you got to use ours. He said, I'm not going to do it. They said, well, we're not going to fund you. He ended up getting full funding from the bank. I learned from that, you don't have to bend and bow. You can make folks respect you. They may not love you, but make them respect you. He was dealing with minority contracting. That's what we got to do. We got to demand it and not play around with it, because they are our tax dollars. They're our tax dollars. And so when I look at Portsmouth, that's a generational wealth project, the development of the waterfront, the community enhancements that we need. Our schools need to have strong programs for our children who are not going to college, who are not just going to the shipyard, but to bring back that old standard that Norcom had, where you could get training in HVAC, plumbing, electrical, for those students that do not qualify to go to Tidewater.
Vocations.
Right. So we have to put that in place, and so those are things that will be diverting tax dollars from traditional places. And so you got to have people who are courageous enough to push forward and make it happen. Unapologetically.
Dr. Whitaker, this has been a great hour.
Yes, it has.
We didn't anticipate, spending or taking as much of your time. There's only one last thing. Listen, the Mega Millions is at $1 billion.
Over $1 billion.
Over $1 billion. I was hoping that you might write down a handful of numbers that a brother could bank on. Listen, let me thank you so much for your time. I know how busy things are. I also know that your family is in the process of seeing your father in his homegoing in a week or so.
Yeah.
And so we're so appreciative that you did take the time. We are obviously here at Norfolk State University, and I shared this with Mayor Glover and as well with Jackie Glass last week. We serve Hampton Roads, and so Portsmouth, although I live in Norfolk now and I work for the university, it says Norfolk State University. It's Hampton Roads University. We support African Americans here at this university and African Americans in this community. And so Portsmouth is home to us, or we are home with Portsmouth. And that's why it's important to have you and the mayor and any other party who represents the city of Portsmouth or Virginia Beach or Hampton or anyone in the Hampton Roads for that matter. This is a place for transparency and open, and we're just glad that you took advantage of this opportunity. So we thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I want to commend you on the work that you all are doing here and continue to be a positive voice in the community. The station looks wonderful, and I know that you all put some hard work and effort in doing it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank
We
you.
are Hot 91, the Soul of VA.